He just walked away, right there at the airport gate. My son, Aaron, with his suitcase over one shoulder, looked me right in the eyes, gave me this faint little smile, and said, "You'll be fine." Then he turned and walked straight into Terminal 4, never even checked to see if I could get on the flight. I stood there, frozen, boarding pass in hand. I didn't move, not even when they made the final call and shut the door. That wasn't just a missed flight. That was something else. That was a message. I'm Irene Whitaker. I'm 67. I raised a man who now treats me like I'm nothing more than forgotten luggage. But what he didn't realize is I still had access to something a whole lot more valuable than his little vacation, something worth $400,000. Have you ever been left behind by someone you raised? If you have, tell me what you would have done. That morning actually started out gently. We drove from Jersey to JFK in his leased SUV, sipping gas station coffee, listening to classic rock like we used to when he was in high school. He said this trip was going to be a mother-son reset. Belize, sunshine, ocean breeze, said I deserved that. And I believed him. I even packed my straw hat. But that day, he was quiet, kept checking his phone, barely looked at me while helping with the bags. Still, I smiled. I told myself we were finally doing something together again. It had been years since I felt like his mom, not just a chore he remembered once a month. At the counter, the agent scanned his passport, then paused when she looked at mine. She said, "I'm not seeing a booking under Irene Whitaker." I turned to Aaron. "Honey?" He blinked. "What? That's weird. Let me check." He pulled me aside, started tapping away on his phone. "Probably just a glitch, Mom. I'll handle it. You just wait here, okay?" So I waited. I waited while he walked towards security with his phone to his ear. I waited while the crowd got smaller, while the final boarding call rang out. I watched a family of 5 run past, laughing and holding hands. Then I heard his voice. I know his voice. He was just behind a pillar. "Yeah, she bought it. Smooth as silk. Should be boarding now." He laughed. I even heard ice clink in his cup. I stepped a little closer, holding tight to the handle of my carry-on. He was on FaceTime, grinning at someone. I heard him say, "Nah, she won't make a fuss. She never does." Then he turned and saw me, didn't flinch, just gave that same little smile and said, "You'll be fine." And that was it. He was gone before I could even speak. My hand was shaking so badly, I almost dropped the boarding pass I never even got to use. The airline agent looked at me with this soft, gentle pity and said, "Ma'am, that was the last call." I sat down on one of those plastic benches near baggage claim, the kind that sticks to the back of your legs. I sat there for a long time, couldn't move, couldn't think. I just stared at the departure board, like I could somehow make time go backward. Then I opened my purse and started digging. Tissues, receipts, old mints. And finally, I found it. The slim, blue bank folder I always kept tucked at the bottom. Aaron had access to the checking account. He even helped me set it up. But I never told him about the other one, the older one, the account Raymond and I opened years ago after the accident. That one had $400,000 in it, and it was still mine. That flight left without me, but what really left that day was my illusion. If you've ever stood in a place, a gate, a kitchen, maybe just your own living room, and realized someone you love has truly walked away from you, maybe you know what that silence sounds like. If any part of this story stirred something in you, leave me a comment, even just a word or two. I read them with the same care I used to read Aaron's bedtime stories. And if this feels like a place you might want to come back to, feel free to subscribe. I still have so much more to tell you. Some wounds don't appear all at once. They sneak up in paperwork and things you never thought you'd question, like, did I really raise the person who did this to me? Stick around. I'll tell you what I found when I finally started asking. The flight disappeared into the clouds, and with it went whatever bit of trust I still had left in him. I sat there in the quiet of Terminal B at Newark Airport, using my coat as a pillow on a hard plastic bench that was clearly never meant for anyone to stay long. But I stayed, for hours. For all the hours Aaron should have noticed I wasn't with him. I called him, once, then again, straight to voicemail every time. That same cheerful voice he used when he was a teenager, leaving notes on the fridge saying things like, "Gone skateboarding, be back later." Only this time, he wasn't coming back. And it wasn't just some teenage phase. He had left me, on purpose. While I was standing in line at the ticket counter, my phone buzzed, a notification from Instagram. Aaron had posted a story. I hesitated for a moment, thumb hovering over the screen, chest tightening. Then I tapped. There he was, smiling by a pool, cocktail in hand. I could hear a woman laughing just off camera. A tall palm tree in the background. The caption said, "Freedom." That one word took the breath right out of me. My suitcase was with him, my clothes, my medication. He had checked it all in without telling me and walked off like I was nothing, like I didn't exist. I bought the cheapest bus ticket I could find back to Newark and climbed on with a bunch of strangers. At one point, as I struggled to open a little bottle of water, a woman sitting beside me noticed my hands shaking. She offered me a tissue. I took it, nodded in thanks, and just stared at the rain running slowly across the window. Sometimes the kindness of a stranger hits deeper than the pain of betrayal. It was late afternoon when the bus hissed to a stop, 2 blocks from my apartment. The sky hung low and gray. I stepped off the bus, my body still stiff from the ride, my sweater damp from the drizzle. A faded diner with flickering neon lights caught my eye, and I went in, mostly just to feel normal again. Coffee, booths, the smell of something greasy in the air. I ordered soup, but I barely touched it. I just sat there, looking out the window, until I noticed my phone blinking, a red voicemail icon. It wasn't from Aaron, it was someone else. I pressed play. "Hi Irene, it's Ellen. I hope everything's okay. I just wanted to follow up. Aaron stopped by the office last week to drop off some papers. He filed for temporary power of attorney. It caught me off guard, so I didn't process it yet. Let's talk soon." My stomach dropped. Power of attorney? I played the message again, then again. I had never signed anything. Ellen was a good friend, but she was also my lawyer. She should have called me the moment he showed up. What was he trying to take control of? I pushed the soup aside, untouched, and stepped back out into the drizzle with the phone pressed to my ear. "Hi, this is Ellen. I'm unavailable at the moment." I hung up and tried her assistant. A young woman answered, polite but hurried. "Ellen's in court all day," she said. "She mentioned something about a real estate hearing. Your house, I think?" My house? I just stood there, rain soaking through my sweater, frozen on the sidewalk. Somewhere between airport security and that diner booth, something had shifted. This wasn't just about being left behind. My son wasn't just leaving me. He was moving forward with my life. The taxi slowed in front of my house, but right away I knew something felt off. The rose bushes were still there along the walkway, wild but blooming. The porch still leaned just a little to the left, like it always had. But there was this weight in the air, like the house was holding its breath, waiting to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. I paid the driver, stepped out, and reached into my coat pocket. My fingers wrapped around the brass key, warm from how tightly I'd been holding it. I slid it into the lock. It didn't turn. I pulled it out, looked at it, tried again. Still nothing. The third time, it slipped from my hand and landed on the welcome mat with a sharp little clatter. I bent down to pick it up, and my hand was shaking. I looked at that door like it had turned its back on me. There was a new lockbox hanging from the knob. Shiny, black, not mine. I hadn't asked for it, hadn't approved it. And when I looked over at the little frog statue on the porch, where I used to keep a fake spare key, it was flipped upside down, empty. That spare had been there since before Aaron was tall enough to ride roller coasters. I pressed my face to the side window and cupped my hands to block out the glare. The living room was mostly how I remembered it, but not quite. My couch was gone, the bookshelf too, replaced with something cold and impersonal. It looked like a page from a catalog, real estate staging furniture. A doorbell rang next door. My neighbor, the one I'd known for 20 years, stepped out to grab her mail. She saw me, I know she did, but she looked away and crossed the street without saying a word. I moved up to the front steps and spotted a flyer stuck in the doorframe. I pulled it out. There was a big photo of my house, smiling like it belonged to someone else. The headline read, "Open house this Sunday at 1 p.m. I scanned the rest of it. The agent's name didn't ring a bell, but buried in the fine print, under the details, one line stopped me cold. Trustee Aaron Whitaker. My name wasn't anywhere, not as the owner, not even as a contact. My heart thudded hard in my chest. I sat down on the steps, dizzy. The drizzle from earlier had turned into a bright, sharp sun, but I still felt cold. Then my phone buzzed. It was an email. Subject line, Property Transfer Confirmation, Hudson State Bank. I opened it. There it was. The deed had been transferred, and it was done through a signed power of attorney, effective immediately. I couldn't breathe for a second. A strange stillness came over me. Not quite panic, not quite rage, but something worse. It was clarity. He had gone to Ellen's office, filed that paper, and now he'd used it. The porch creaked beneath me, soft and slow, like even the house was confused about who it belonged to now. I stood up, scanning the front yard like I was seeing it for the first time. The wind chime near the gutter clinked in the breeze. Aaron used to call it old people noise, said he'd get rid of it one day. Maybe now he finally had. But this wasn't just about keys, or locks, or furniture. This was about being removed, quietly, officially. I had been erased, and the worst part, I never even saw it coming. The office smelled like lemons and steel. It felt cold, quiet, too much glass, not enough warmth. I walked in from the rain, still damp across my shoulders, and the receptionist barely glanced at me. "Do you have an appointment, ma'am?" she asked. Her voice was crisp, polite, distant. Ma'am, not Mrs. Whitaker, not Irene, just another stranger with wrinkles on her hands and worn-down shoes. "I'm here to see Ellen Graves," I said as I brushed the water off my coat. "It's urgent." Her lips tightened a little. "She's in meetings all morning." I sat down anyway. The waiting area had leather chairs that were too deep to sit in comfortably. There were old magazines no one had touched since 2019. A man in a sharp suit passed by holding a folder. A young couple sat nearby, smiling nervously while signing a clipboard. People in that room were building lives, transferring futures. I was there to reclaim mine. After a while, Ellen's door opened just a crack. She saw me, froze, then stepped all the way out. "Irene," she said, and it wasn't a question. "Come in." Her office felt warmer. The light was soft. The shelves were real wood. A small orchid sat on the windowsill, still waiting to bloom. She closed the door behind me with a quiet, firm click. "I got your message," I said, sitting down. "I saw the email from the bank, and the flyer." Ellen gave a small nod and pulled out a thick folder. "These were filed 6 months ago," she said. "Power of attorney, financial access, the house deed, multiple bank accounts." I stared at her. "That's impossible. I never." "I know," she said gently, cutting me off. "I know your signature, Irene. And this." She slid a page across the desk. It looked like mine. Almost. But the slant was off. The W was too narrow. The loop in the K was too smooth. It looked like my handwriting, but it didn't feel like it. "I never signed that," I said quietly. "I believe you," she said, "but the notary says otherwise. His name's Jared Lang, says he witnessed it." "Who is that?" Ellen shook her head. He exists, technically, but I've never worked with him, and I'd bet you haven't either. She reached for another sheet. Property records. Your home, she said, was transferred to a holding LLC 3 months ago. That company is registered under Aaron's name. I couldn't breathe for a moment. He had moved everything I owned into his name, like it was nothing, like it was just packing boxes. He once told me I'd never have to worry about paperwork again, I whispered, said he'd take care of everything. Ellen took off her glasses and rubbed her temples. Then she looked straight at me. You've been removed, Irene, legally, financially, and very deliberately. I leaned back. The room tilted, just for a second. Not because of the betrayal, I had already felt that, but because of the planning, the precision. This wasn't emotional. This was calculated. What do I do? I asked her. She folded her hands together. You fight. The silence between us wasn't heavy. It wasn't light either. It just needed to be there. Then she leaned in, eyes sharp. But I have to ask you, she said. Do you want to? I looked down at the signature. My name written by someone else. I raised him, I said. Yes, she answered. And now you decide if you're going to stop him. She opened a drawer, pulled out a yellow legal pad, clicked her pen. If we start, she said, we start today. The room was small, tucked just above Ellen's office. It was quiet, warm, and filled with books. She called it a guest suite, though it smelled more like old paper than fresh linens. Still, there was something comforting about it. The sunlight came in through the blinds, casting long, honey-colored lines across the wooden floor. I set my overnight bag on the chair. It wasn't really a bag, just an old canvas tote with a change of clothes, a hairbrush, and a small envelope of cash I'd kept hidden in the kitchen drawer for emergencies. I guess this counted. I reached in and pulled out my notebook, the blue one I usually used for grocery lists and doctor's appointments. Its corners were bent, and there was a faint stain on the back cover, probably from a peach that had leaked at some point. I flipped to a clean page and started writing. Dear Aaron, how does it feel to turn your mother into a ghost? I paused. It sounded too polished, too poetic, but it was honest, and that mattered more than how it sounded. I kept going. I wrote about the notes I used to tuck into his lunchbox, the ones that said things like, "You've got this," or "Eat the banana, not just the cookie." I wrote about teaching him to ride a bike, about the nights he called for me after bad dreams, about the time his 8th grade girlfriend broke up with him and I made hot cocoa while pretending I didn't know why he was crying. Then I wrote what I really needed to say. You don't get to have both. You don't get to use me and erase me. You don't get to smile on a beach while I sleep in a bus station. By the time I finished, my hand was shaking. I looked at the page for a long moment, then folded it in half, then once more. I thought I'd keep it, but I didn't. Instead, I copied just 2 lines into the inside cover of the notebook. You made me invisible, but I'm still here. You don't get to win. Then I crumpled the letter and dropped it into the little bin under the desk. A soft knock came at the doorframe. Ellen was standing there with a mug in her hands. "Chamomile," she said. "Wasn't sure if you'd eaten." I took the cup. It was warm, steadying. She didn't ask questions, just sat on the edge of the window seat, quietly watching the street outside. "I think," I said, "I'm ready to be angry." She gave a single nod. Good. That's where the good work begins. The tea smelled like old gardens and sleep. I took a sip, then set it down and walked over to the desk. I opened my laptop. The screen lit up, glowing against the notebook beside me. I didn't write another letter. I opened a new document and typed, "Petition to reverse fraudulent transfer of property, Irene Whitaker v. Aaron Whitaker." Because ghosts don't type, and I wasn't disappearing quietly. The door creaked as I pushed it open. A little brass bell jingled overhead, cheerful in a way that didn't match how I felt. The smell hit me right away. Coffee, printer ink, and that dry, dusty scent of paper that's been sitting in folders for years. "Miss Whitaker?" a voice called out. I looked up. There was a man behind a cluttered desk wearing a tie that had a faded coffee stain like it had lived through 2 recessions. His shoes made a soft squeak when he moved, but his eyes told me he missed nothing. Steel gray, focused, sharp. "Come on back," he said. "I'm Donnelly. Ellen gave me a heads up." The office was smaller than I expected. No windows, a cheap fan humming in the corner, books and papers stacked in uneven towers against the walls. He motioned to a chair across from him, then sat down with a grunt and took a sip from a chipped Rutgers mug. "You're not the first mother to be burned by her own blood," he said. "Won't be the last." I didn't say anything. I just reached into my bag and handed him the file folder. Inside were the bank statements, the power of attorney document with my name but not my handwriting, and the deed that no longer listed me at all. He flipped through the papers slowly, pausing here and there to squint at something. At one point, he picked up a yellow highlighter and made a quiet mark. When he reached the end, he looked up at me. "This right here," he said, pointing to the wire transfers, "this is where your case gets interesting." There were 3 withdrawals, each one just under the amount that triggers automatic federal reporting, each one within a week of that forged signature. He leaned back in his chair. "You've got a pattern. That means something. Judges don't care much about hurt feelings, but they do care about numbers." I nodded, tried not to grip the arms of the chair too hard. My fingers were aching. "Your son knew how to keep it just under the radar. That's common. The hard part is proving you didn't authorize it. It's not easy, but with the right motion, we can freeze everything he touched until a judge sorts out the truth." My voice came out softer than I expected. "What do you need from me?" He gave me a faint smile. "Truth, patience, and a spine. Looks like you've got all 3. I sat up straighter. Then he pulled out a legal pad. "Let's get to work. First thing is an emergency injunction. Then we prep you for deposition. You ready?" I looked at him, and in that moment, something inside me settled. Not anger, not grief, just a steady kind of resolve. "Yes," I said. "Let's start." He gave a small nod, like he'd heard those words before, but still respected what they meant. "Then we freeze him out, Miss Whitaker, starting today." When I stepped outside into the late afternoon light, my phone buzzed. It was Aaron. His name lit up the screen like a bruise I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I stared at it, let it ring. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel helpless. I felt done waiting. If any part of what I've said reminds you of something you've been through, quiet betrayals, people you trusted turning cold, I'd really like to hear from you. You don't have to tell the whole story. Just let me know I'm not the only one. And if you're still here, still listening, maybe hit that subscribe button. There's more to come. And what I uncovered next wasn't in any legal file. The driveway still had that little oil stain from when Aaron's first car used to leak. Funny how that one spot stayed, even though everything else had changed. I stood there with the deputy beside me, court order in hand, feeling this hollow ache bloom right under my ribs. The key he handed me felt off. Honestly, everything did. When I opened the door, it creaked like no one had touched it in weeks. Inside, the air was cold, not just in temperature, but in spirit. The walls were bare. All the framed photos, the drawings Aaron made as a kid, our wedding picture, they were gone, replaced by gray paint and silence. This was still my house, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. I walked toward the kitchen, slowly, and that's when I saw it. The pothos plant on the windowsill, dry, drooping, and brown, like it had just given up. I remembered whispering to it before I left for the airport, "See you soon." I'd watered it gently that morning, never thinking it might be the last time. I reached out and touched one of the curled leaves, and for a moment, I wasn't thinking about legal battles or betrayal. I was just a woman standing in front of something that had been quietly forgotten. "10 minutes, ma'am," the deputy said gently. I nodded. I moved to the hallway closet. Empty. The guest room had been stripped bare. No quilts. The rocking chair was gone. In the master bedroom, I found one drawer half open. Inside were my husband's cufflinks, the silver ones with WH engraved on them. I gave him those on our 20th anniversary. Now they were tossed in like junk, sitting next to an expired coupon and one lonely sock. I picked them up and held them in my palm like they might break. My breath caught, but no tears came, not yet. I walked through the rest of the house. The wedding album was gone, the recipe box with Grandma's handwriting, gone. The needlepoint pillows I made when Aaron left for college weren't even thrown out. They'd just disappeared. Through the window, I saw Mrs. Lawson from across the street. She was standing with her arms folded, watching. I braced myself for her to look away, maybe pretend she didn't see me. But she didn't. She crossed the street and met me at the sidewalk as I stepped outside, carrying a small cardboard box and the dying plant. "I didn't know what to say when it happened," she said softly, "but I kept this for you." She handed me a folded note and walked away before I could answer. I opened it right there on the sidewalk. "You're stronger than he ever was." The handwriting was faded, the ink barely holding on after time and humidity, but the words hit me like a full breath after being underwater. I hadn't come there for revenge. I'd come to get back what was mine, to collect what I'd lost. And yet, somehow, I left with something else. Not justice, not yet, but someone saw me. As the deputy locked the door behind us, I stood for a moment and looked up at the window where my pothos used to sit, green and thriving. I held the brittle plant against my chest and whispered into the breeze. This time, I'm not coming back as a guest. The smell of cinnamon and bacon hung in the air, but I couldn't taste a thing. I held on to my chipped mug with both hands, letting the warmth steady me, while Ellen flipped through a folder of deposition prep questions like she was just reading off a brunch menu. "You'll be cross-examined," she said, calm and steady. "Are you ready to be questioned by your own son?" The sound of silverware clinking at nearby tables suddenly felt sharp and too loud. A toddler giggled behind us. Life was moving forward for everyone else, but I was stuck, somewhere between heartbreak and a courtroom. Donnelly sat across from me, in his usual worn blazer and that tie he never replaced. He adjusted his glasses and looked right at me. He's probably going to make you look confused, vulnerable, maybe even unstable. I looked down at my notes. The words were there, but they didn't seem to settle. They blurred and floated. "Stick to what you know," Ellen said, stirring her coffee slowly. "Don't guess. Don't try to explain what he was thinking. Just speak your truth." That word again, truth, like it had ever done me any favors. Donnelly pointed to a timeline he'd drawn in red ink. "These 3 transfers right here, those are key. He moved that money right after he filed the forged documents. And the LLC, that's our clearest piece of evidence." I nodded like I understood, even though I didn't feel sure of anything. "He's going to say you gave it to him," Donnelly added. "The house, the money, that it was a gift, out of love, out of gratitude." A laugh slipped out of me. It was low, bitter. Right, nothing says love like leaving your mother at Terminal B and changing the locks. Ellen gave me a rare, tiny smile. "Exactly, and that's what we're going to show." I ran my fingers along the rim of my teacup, just tracing. Then I whispered, mostly to myself, "What if they believe him?" Ellen leaned in. Her voice was firm, quiet. "I don't need them to like you. I need them to see you, and they will." Donnelly added, You lived this. He lived off it. That's the difference. I looked at the two of them. These were people who didn't owe me a thing, but they were here. Can I try saying it? I asked. They both nodded. I took a deep breath and finally said the words that had haunted me since that airport bench. He kidnapped me. The cafe noise seemed to drop away for a second. Ellen didn't flinch. Donnelly gave a slow nod. Good, he said. Own that sentence. Make them hear it. And just as I felt the first flicker of something steady in my chest, Ellen's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her face tightened. Well, she said as she stood and started gathering her things, Aaron just hired counsel. Donnelly raised a brow. Who? She turned her phone to show us, and I felt my stomach twist. It was a name I knew, someone from television, big, flashy, media-trained, ruthless. Ellen muttered, Aaron's not playing fair. I folded my napkin slowly and whispered, he never did, but neither am I. As we stood to leave, I caught my reflection in the cafe window. The eyes were tired, the skin weathered, but there was something else too, a stillness, a quiet kind of readiness. The courtroom had that faint smell of floor polish and old tension. My heels echoed against the marble as I walked in. I looked around at the benches, but my eyes landed on him. Aaron was sitting across the room, dressed sharp, back straight. He never once looked my way, just leaned in toward his attorney, that woman with the reputation, and said something I couldn't hear. Then he smirked. I used to save seats for him, school plays, Sunday service, Thanksgiving dinner. And now here we were, sitting on opposite sides of a room that didn't care about history, just evidence. Judge Feldman came in, robe swishing, expression unreadable. He adjusted his glasses and gave a nod to the attorneys. Aaron's lawyer stood first. Every word was crisp, smooth. She said, Your Honor, my client assumed the role of caregiver and financial steward during a time when his mother, Miss Whitaker, began showing signs of cognitive inconsistency. Every action taken was in her best interest. A couple people in the back leaned in. I gripped the fabric of my skirt under the table, trying to stay steady. Then Donnelly stood. His voice was firm. We'll provide documented evidence to the contrary, Your Honor. Bank records, expert handwriting analysis, and direct testimony from Miss Whitaker herself. This isn't about confusion. It's about betrayal, fraud, and erasure. The judge nodded. Proceed. They called me to the stand. My knees felt shaky, but I kept my back straight. The clerk swore me in, and I sat down, hands damp, throat dry. Irene Whitaker, I said into the mic. My voice trembled once, but it didn't break. Mother to Aaron Whitaker, widow, retired teacher. Donnelly started slow. Can you walk us through what happened on July 2nd? So I did. I told them everything. The airport, that cold plastic bench, the call that never connected, coming home to a lock I didn't recognize, a mailbox without my name. He asked about the paperwork. I told them I never signed those documents. Ellen's team had tracked down the notary signature, someone I'd never even met. Then there were the wire transfers, the LLC, the deed, and that quiet voice inside me that kept saying he knew exactly what he was doing. When I mentioned the pothos plant I left on the windowsill, someone in the room coughed, then silence. Aaron didn't flinch. No reaction, just held the image he'd crafted. I looked over at the judge. He scribbled something in his notes, but gave nothing away. Donnelly gave me a small nod, and I stepped down. I didn't even realize I'd been holding my breath until I sat back down beside him. My chest felt tight from hours of waiting to exhale. The judge cleared his throat. We'll reconvene tomorrow. Be prepared. The next part gets personal. Chairs scraped, papers rustled, people stood. I turned toward the exit, ready to leave, when I heard him behind me. This won't change anything, you know. Aaron. I didn't stop walking. I didn't turn around.
But I did grip the file in my hands just a little tighter. The second day in court felt quieter. The room wasn't empty, but it didn't feel like a performance anymore. It felt like something heavier, something real. Outside, the rain tapped softly against the windows, steady and slow, like it was keeping time with my heartbeat. When Donnelly stood, he looked as composed as ever, holding that thick navy blue folder. "Your Honor," he said, calm and steady, "we submit into evidence Exhibit B." He walked it over to the judge, placed it down, and opened it slowly, like he was showing something that still hurt to look at. These are 3 documents bearing Miss Whitaker's signature, 2 verified, 1 contested, all filed within a 5-day window. I knew those papers. One was my will. The second, a letter I wrote to the bank asking for a change in my monthly distributions. Both were real. The third one, though, the power of attorney, that was the one I hadn't seen until July. It had my name on it, in ink, but not my handwriting. Donnelly turned to the court. "We'll now hear from expert witness, Miss Keating." She stepped forward, silver hair, sharp glasses, and a presence that made people listen. She'd spent over 30 years studying handwriting, court cases, fraud, even ransom notes, and now she was here to look at mine. She clicked through her slideshow, one image at a time. "This is Miss Whitaker's signature from 2019. Notice the loop on the W, the clean baseline." Then she moved to the next slide. "Now this is the signature on the power of attorney. See how the baseline flattens, the pressure's heavier, and the loop is reversed. Classic signs of an imitation." The courtroom went still. Even the judge leaned in just a bit. Aaron didn't, but I noticed his knee bouncing under the table. His jaw was tighter than yesterday. He gripped his pen like it might snap.
Ellen leaned over to me and whispered, "Watch the timing. He's unraveling." Aaron's attorney stood and tried to spin it. "Miss Keating, are you saying this was forged? Isn't it possible Miss Whitaker just had an off day? People's signatures change." Keating didn't budge. Not like this. Not in 3 days. Not with this level of detail. It's not natural variation. It's mimicry. Then came the moment Donnelly had been waiting for. He pressed a button, and the speakers in the courtroom came to life. It was a voicemail. My voice, from last year. I was in Barcelona, scared, alone, calling Ellen. "I don't know what's happening, Ellen. Aaron left. I don't have my passport. Please call me back." Then an automated voice followed. "Your location has been tagged, Paseo de Gracia, Barcelona." The judge stopped writing. Aaron's attorney tried to shift the conversation, but it was too late. When recess was called, the judge took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I need time to review these materials. We'll resume tomorrow for closing statements." We stood up slowly. My legs held me, but just barely. Outside the courtroom, I leaned against the cool marble wall and watched people walk by. Strangers, with their own lives, groceries, work, raincoats, nothing like this. And mine was about proving I existed, proving I didn't imagine the betrayal, that my name still mattered. Ellen appeared beside me, holding her phone low, eyes serious. "He's planning something," she said quietly. "I don't know what yet, but he's not done." I looked through the glass doors at the street. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray. And this time, even when thunder cracked in the distance, I didn't flinch. I used to sit by that window with a book in my lap and a mug of cocoa in my hand, listening to the wind press softly against the glass. Today, I sat there again, but instead of a book, I had 30 pages of legal notes on my lap and a slightly soggy boiled egg sandwich that Ellen had made out of habit and care. The rain tapped against the window like an old metronome, steady and slow, somehow matching the rhythm of the storm inside my chest. Ellen came in without knocking. She never knocked. She held her own mug, steam curling up from the top. She placed the sandwich beside me and said, "Eat." Then, after a quiet pause, she asked,
what would you do if the judge gave it all back? The question hit harder than I thought it would. I kept my eyes on the gray sky and let it settle. I used to think I didn't want anything back, I said. Not the money, not the house, not even an apology. Ellen didn't say anything. She just sat in the armchair across from me and let the silence stretch. I just wanted to matter, I said, to not be erased. The tulips next to the lamp were already leaning in their vase. They reminded me of something from long ago. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was back in the old kitchen. Aaron was 7, flour on his cheeks. He held up a crooked cookie and grinned. "You're a superhero, Mom." Back then, the only courtroom I worried about was when he got caught pulling Jenny Lawson's pigtails and had to explain himself to her mom. I opened my eyes. That little boy was gone. "Where did he go?" I whispered. Ellen looked over. Maybe he got lost, or maybe he chose the easy road. She took a sip of her tea, then asked again, "If you had the $400,000, what would you really do?" I let the question wash over me, and this time the answer surprised me. "I'd open that little used book cafe in Montclair," I said, "the one I always talked about but never had the guts to do. Coffee, lemon loaf, worn armchairs, a place where people could come in, sit down, and not feel forgotten." Ellen smiled and raised her teacup. I clinked mine against hers. "To Chapter 2, she said. I nodded, to rewriting the first one. The stack of papers in my lap felt lighter somehow, like it wasn't just about the court anymore, it was about finding my own space again. I turned to the last page, my closing statement. It wasn't polished, but it was mine. Every word written late at night, between quiet tears and cups of tea I made just to keep going. "Whatever the judge decides," I said, mostly to the window, "I'm done surviving. I want to live again." Just then, my phone buzzed on the table beside me. A message from Donnelly. "Judge ruling tomorrow, 10 a.m. Be early." I stared at the screen, then turned it face down. The rain kept falling, soft and steady. I picked up the sandwich and took a bite. It tasted like boiled hope and mustard. Plain, but just enough. The courtroom was still, just the faint sound of paper shuffling and the low hum of the overhead lights. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, one thumb circling the other, slowly and steadily, like I was holding on to something invisible but essential. Judge Feldman cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "this court finds that the documents presented by Mr. Whitaker were fraudulently obtained and used without your informed consent." I didn't breathe. Then he kept going, voice calm and clear. "All assets, including your primary residence and associated retirement accounts, are hereby restored. Mr. Aaron Whitaker is ordered to pay court fees and a penalty for elder exploitation under state statute." I let out a breath, quietly, not in victory, not in joy, just relief. 10 months of pressure releasing with one sentence. Across the room, Aaron stood motionless. Not shocked, not angry, just empty, like he'd run out of story. He shifted, like he was going to say something, maybe explain, maybe apologize. But I stood first. "I heard enough at gate 37, I said. My voice was steady, loud enough for the room to hear, soft enough that it still belonged to me. Donnelly gave me a glance that felt like respect. Ellen didn't even try to hide her pride. She reached for my arm and guided me out. Outside, the air was crisp, the kind that wakes you up. Yellow leaves fell around us like little reminders that things end so new things can begin. Ellen hugged me, not out of obligation, but with real strength, the kind that says, "I've got you," and I always did. Aaron walked past us without saying a word. No one followed him. A month later, my little shop opened. Clean windows, fresh air, and a lot of elbow grease. A secondhand bookstore with a coffee counter wasn't going to change the world, but it was mine. Every mismatched mug, every squeaky floorboard, every book placed on the shelf, I chose it. The sign on the window said Gate Reclaimed. I painted it myself in dark green, the same color I used in Aaron's nursery all those years ago. It felt right, full circle. Mrs. Lawson stopped by around 10. She brought muffins and a hesitant smile. "Thought you might need something to go with the coffee," she said. "The town's talking." I smiled. Let them. We sat at the little corner table near the window. The pothos plant was back there too, alive again, new leaves stretching toward the sun like they'd never been forgotten. A woman came in holding a toddler. "You open?" she asked. I walked behind the counter and smiled. Not because I won, not because of justice, but because I could, because I made it through something that nearly broke me. "Yes," I said, flipping the sign to open. I looked down at the counter, a fresh pot of coffee, a plate of Ellen's banana bread, a copy of Jane Eyre with a worn-out spine waiting for someone to love it again. I placed both hands flat on the wood and whispered, "Let's begin." Because life wasn't over, not even close, and this time the gate wasn't closing behind me, it was wide open. Sometimes justice doesn't come with noise or applause. Sometimes it's just a quiet morning, a warm window, and the feeling that you finally made it home. I used to think losing family meant losing everything, but now I understand. Real family isn't something that can be taken from you. It's the ones who stand beside you when everything else falls away. It's the ones who show up when it's hardest. When love is no longer safe, dignity becomes the anchor. And when we forget who we are, the fight to remember is still worth it. If any part of this story touched you, I'd love to hear from you. A memory, a moment, or even just a word, leave a comment below. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, you're always welcome here. And if your heart's still open for one more chapter of quiet strength, stay with me. The next story begins when a daughter closed the door during her father's will reading and said, "You'll regret this." My daughter told me to leave the room during my husband's inheritance meeting. You'll regret this.